And so I guess as part of this bleeds into, I think, a whole bunch of other topics when it comes to individual personality or individual responsibility, personal liberties. And one of the things that also has come up recently is gun rights. And so there's a really, I don't know, complex situation, right? When it comes to, let's say, the Second Amendment, people's right to bear arms, combined with the safety of the public. And so there was recently a mass shooting that occurred inside of a supermarket. When people, I think, see the headline, they say, hey, there's a mass shooting that occurred. Immediately it's let's go and kind of install much more kind of stringent gun laws, right, or gun control laws. What surprised me, and again, I'll be the first one to say that in many of these cases, you just don't know the nuances until you start to look into it, and you really got to kind of understand some of it. It seems like a rational argument. Hey, we should have gun control, and there's a spectrum there, right? Obviously, having ID before you buy a gun is some form of gun control, but then there's like very, very stringent outlawing of guns, etc. But in Colorado specifically, it appears that there was an assault rifle ban. There was, all sorts of mental illness type rules in place, and just a lot of the things that people normally call for around gun control were already in place. And then there was still a shooting. And so, is it something where, using gun control as one example of many, many of these topics, where rules can actually change the situation or address the situation? Or is it just a thing where it's like criminals and bad people are going to do bad things, and part of being a criminal is like breaking the rules, right? Like, and again, I don't think there's a right answer, but I think this specific situation, as I dug more into it, it was actually shocking to me, frankly, of like a lot of these measures around gun control seem to actually have been implemented in Colorado, yet there was still the shooting. And so how do you think through that? Is there a right answer? Just kind of, if you were an elected official, how you would kind of act in this situation.
Yeah. And what happened was tragic, but we look at, you're right. I mean, the amount of laws that were already put in place, when you look at federally, the amount of gun laws that are already passed from a federal perspective, and then individually, I mean, I live, close to Chicago, where we have the strictest gun laws possible. And unfortunately, 25 people were shot just a couple weeks ago. Nobody in the media really talked about that. A little boy was shot. When you have a situation like what happened in Boulder, it's very sad that, people are quick to politicize things without actually breaking down the facts. A big thing that I saw too was, the race of the shooter and all this stuff. When we start talking about just everything from a surface level perspective, in the soundbite kind of era that we live in, the facts are not able to come through unless you dig really deep. And you were right. I mean, the laws in Boulder, they've put every single gun law possible, that could have, quote unquote, in their eyes, prevented it, yet it still happened, right? There are bad people that do bad things. It is the person, not the weapon. But when you look at, again, why our individual liberties were instilled in the first place, we must respect that too for the overwhelming majority of law-abiding citizens. And every time we have these conversations, when a tragedy happens, or we try to push more gun control measures when there already are some in place, then we are chipping away at that individual liberty every time. And so the focus needs to be, yes, is there areas to improve on in mental health? Sure, let's look at that. But let's also look at why, I heard a statistic I was reading about this, and the FBI he'd already been on, the watch list, or he had been associated with somebody in the FBI watch list. He was on somebody's radar. And again, that's all the government involvement, that's all the control possible. And yet it unfortunately still happened. We need to take a hard look at the reality that people will do evil things, but no matter what the situation is, it should not be at the expense of the law-abiding, free American citizen. And that's ultimately what gun control, when they impose those things, it ultimately hurts the law-abiding citizen.
So we don't know each other super well, but I'm guessing that you don't believe the solution is just, hey, allow it to happen. And so, meaning like a mass shooting or a significant negative event. What is the solution, right? If you're running for Congress and you're in that seat, and somebody says to you, hey, how do we prevent these situations from occurring? What do you think the solution is?
How can you prevent again, when you have all the control in the world possible in a situation, again, like in Boulder, how can you prevent that? You've seen situations that people who are armed have been able to actually thwart these situations or prevent more killings from happening. A lot of these situations, when you look at the mass shootings, they happen in, I don't think this particular instance was one of these, but schools or where weapons aren't allowed. So ultimately, the very vulnerable areas that a mass shooter will go in and understand that they are not going to be met with a aggression back, right? That's a tough one to answer, but ultimately, I am for individual liberty, preserving our Second Amendment right as much as possible. And people need to understand that, again, criminals will get, whether it was a gun or whether or not it was a truck, or, so a criminal will commit the crime that they want to commit. And again, we maybe need to look at the mental health issue that was happening with that particular individual. But in terms of gun control, that's not the avenue that I would be looking to solve the problem with.